Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're jumping straight into an incredibly intense chapter of history. We're untangling the complex web of India's pre-independence politics during the ultimate pressure cooker environment, which was, of course, World War II. We're going to dive into the source material to see exactly how high-stakes diplomacy and some very deep, very real ideological fractures nearly derailed a nation's fight for freedom. So let's get right into it.
To give you a quick roadmap of where we're headed, we'll start by looking at the Congress in crisis, specifically the epic clash between Gandhi and Subhas Bose. Then we'll see what happens when World War II erupts, how the British respond with the August offer, Gandhi's countermove with individual Satyagraha, and finally, the dramatic failure of the Cripps Mission.
I want to kick things off with this striking quote from Mahatma Gandhi to Subhas Chandra Bose. He says, "I do not see any possibility of bridging them." This perfectly captures a movement completely on the brink. We often think of the Indian National Congress as this totally unified monolith, but that just wasn't the case. This internal ideological friction was bubbling up, and it was about to cause a massive rupture.
So, let's unpack that rupture. We're looking at the internal fractures and rising tensions tearing at the Congress.
Just look at how fast things escalated here. In 1938, Bose was elected unanimously. Everything seems fine, right? Well, by the 1939 Tripuri Session, the fracture was impossible to ignore. Bose was actually re-elected against Gandhi's explicit wishes. Why? Because Bose was pushing for a militant, 6-month ultimatum to Britain. Gandhi flat out refused to support it. This deadlock was so intense, it forced Bose to resign his presidency by April, and by May, he went off and created his own radical faction, the Forward Bloc.
That brings us to a real clash of titans, Gandhi versus Subhas Bose. At its core, this is a classic debate of means versus ends. For Gandhi, the journey mattered just as much as the destination. He demanded strict nonviolence, or ahimsa, because he deeply feared that a violent revolution would just leave behind a legacy of hatred. But Bose? Bose was a militant pragmatist. For him, the end result, ousting the imperialists, absolutely justified the means. He was even willing to use violent resistance and ally with Axis powers like Germany and Japan to get it done. And their political visions for a free India? They were literally worlds apart. Gandhi envisioned Ram Raja, which was this decentralized, almost pre-modern utopia made up of independent village republics that would need virtually no military. Bose wanted the exact opposite. He envisioned a highly disciplined, robust authoritarian state. He actually advocated for a synthesis of socialism and fascism to rapidly modernize the nation and build a strong military. Economically, it was the exact same story. Gandhi championed khadi, the spinning wheel, and a simple peasant life. He was genuinely terrified of the dehumanizing effects of heavy machinery. Bose, on the other hand, believed true freedom required heavy industry. He wanted to modernize backward agriculture and push for massive, rapid industrialization, all overseen by a comprehensive national planning committee. But here is the fascinating twist. Despite being like oil and water politically, look at how they actually converged on some of the most crucial social issues. Both men fiercely championed women's empowerment. Bose even went on to form the Rani of Jhansi Combat Regiment, an all-female military unit. Both fought against the evils of untouchability, and both envisioned a completely tolerant society free from religious discrimination, though Gandhi approached it as a devout believer and Bose as a strict secularist.
Okay, so that's the internal landscape. Now let's add an external shock into the mix. World War II erupts. When the global shockwave of the war hit in September 1939, Britain did something that absolutely infuriated Indian leadership. They unilaterally dragged India into the conflict without consulting a single Indian leader. The Congress Working Committee rushed to an emergency meeting at Warda, and when the British Viceroy gave a completely negative response to their demands for a promise of post-war freedom, the Congress ministries across the provinces did the unthinkable. In late October, they resigned entirely en masse.
That Warda meeting really highlights the internal chaos we were just talking about. Gandhi actually wanted to offer unconditional moral support to the Allies simply because he hated fascism so much. Bose and the leftists, they wanted to immediately exploit Britain's moment of weakness and launch a massive uprising. Ultimately, it was Jawaharlal Nehru's nuanced middle ground that won out. He refused to support imperialism, but he also refused to blindly take advantage of Britain's life-or-death struggle. The final verdict from the committee: zero Indian support unless freedom is granted immediately.
And that brings us right into a tense diplomatic standoff with what's known as the August offer.
So picture this.
France has fallen to the Nazis, Congress ministries have resigned, and Britain is getting desperate. They try to extend an olive branch in the summer of 1940. This August offer promised Dominion status in the future. It promised a post-war constituent assembly mostly made up of Indians, and crucially, it stated that minority consent, which was a very clear nod to the Muslim League, was essential for any future constitutional settlement. Now on paper, maybe that sounds like a step forward, right? So we have to ask, why did both the Congress and the Muslim League look at this supposedly conciliatory offer and completely reject it?
To understand that, we need to look at Gandhi's next move, individual Satyagraha, which was a very measured, calculated pushback. The August offer failed because it offered exactly zero real immediate power. Plus, it effectively handed minorities a veto over the Congress. Gandhi knew he had to push back, but he did it strategically. To avoid mass chaos or communal violence during a global war, he designed this individual Satyagraha. The goals were very precise. 1. Prove that their patience wasn't weakness. 2. Publicly express their anti-war sentiment. And 3. Keep the door open for peace. By having carefully chosen individuals step up and peacefully court arrest by giving anti-war speeches, they managed to log 25,000 arrests without causing outright wartime anarchy.
I want to pause on a really fascinating historical irony here. Right in the middle of all this wartime turmoil, Mahatma Gandhi officially designated Jawaharlal Nehru as his chosen successor. Think about that for a second. Despite their massive, well-documented differences on things like industrialization and modernity, Gandhi knew that their shared belief in nonviolence, and most importantly, an inclusive patriotism, was exactly what was needed to keep the movement glued together.
Which leads us to the final precipice, the failure of the Cripps Mission.
You have to understand, the Cripps Mission of 1942 was not born out of some sudden burst of British goodwill. Not at all. It was born out of sheer panic. The Japanese military had absolutely overrun Southeast Asia, and they were quite literally at India's doorstep, having reached Rangoon. With the threat of an invasion looming large, allies like the US and China placed intense, heavy pressure on Britain to finally secure Indian cooperation for the war effort.
So Stafford Cripps is sent over, and he arrives with these terms. On the surface, offering an Indian union with Dominion status and a constituent assembly looked somewhat promising, but look closely at that third point. Provinces unwilling to join the union could form a separate union. This was a massive poison pill. It essentially legitimized the Muslim League's demand for a separate state, blowing the door wide open to the partition of India. So, even though it was arguably a major step up from the August offer, the Cripps Mission crashed and burned completely. Why was it universally rejected by Indian leadership across the board?
Ultimately, it all came down to trust, or rather the complete lack of it. It failed because it offered no immediate transfer of real power. The British absolutely refused to let Indians handle their own wartime defense. The Congress totally refused to accept what Gandhi essentially viewed as a post-dated check on a crashing bank. They weren't about to let true power remain firmly in British hands while a foreign invasion was literally looming over them.
And this massive diplomatic failure left India on a razor's edge. Talks were totally dead, patience was completely and utterly exhausted, and the Japanese army was practically at the border. So the provocative question we leave you with today is this. With their backs against the wall, what explosive historic mass movement would the Indian nationalists be forced to unleash next? Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the history behind the headlines.